Ask that you respect the 3-minute time limit. You will have a slight ding at 2.5 minutes to give you time to wrap up your conversation at 3 minutes. I'm going to ask that everyone refrain from applause, because that's going to just take up the time from everyone speaking. We have quite a list of speaking tonight. I have set a deadline at tonight's meeting at 10 o'clock. Let me say that if we don't get to everyone speaking tonight, we will hold another meeting. If you don't speak tonight, don't worry, you will be next on the next meeting. We're also going to take a 5-minute break at 8 o'clock, but I want to get started. Do you need it now? At 8 o'clock, but I want to get started right now. Oh, before I do that, board members, any questions before we go to public?
Yeah, I have questions. I have a question for Renaissance as far as their piazza. Aside from the retail that you're going to have planned there, and aside from the events that Bristol Rising is planning, what's the draw going to be to make me want to hang outside somebody else's apartment building?
So the piazza would be built with Building B, so that would include 20,000 feet of retail space. So if you just took, 2,000 feet as the average space, you talk about 10 restaurants and retail establishments that we consider from a planning perspective called through retail. So you would have entrances and retail entrances both on the street side and on the piazza side. So there would be outdoor dining, there would be opportunity for folks to shop and communicate, and obviously we'd have, as you mentioned, events.
What if there are no restaurants, and if there's going to be some time between the building and the actual restaurants coming in, what's going to be the draw then?
Well, it's in the early 2000s, you could potentially finance a building with very little commitments on leases. These days, you need a pretty significant amount of lease commitments from a retail perspective, so we would anticipate that if we move forward with Building B, a significant amount of that retail would be pre-leased.
Any other questions? Thank you. We're going to start. I have one letter to be read into the record that was dropped off at my office. Don, would you please read that into record, please? This is from public, and then we're going to have James Ritchie. You'll be after this letter.
This letter is addressed to the mayor of the city of Bristol. Subject is Depot Square. Dear Mayor Cockayne, to date, the city of Bristol has spent over $8 million, including the former mall purchase and demolition for the subject project. Initially, the people were told that the financing for the construction costs for the subject project would be primarily funded via the private sector. However, earlier this year, Renaissance made the declaration that it would take at least an additional $6 million, potentially much more, in public financing from the city to make the first phase of the project a possibility of private projects. Apparently, the city has been misinformed since project inception, which has deceived its residents. At the very least, the success of the beginning phases of the project should be classified as a high-risk investment. The city cannot afford to gamble the fund of its constituents on a high-risk, privately owned project, which may be legally questionable. The current economic climate and near-future forecast renders this project investment as a whole a high-risk investment. As a resident of the city, I certainly do not want any part of the risk financially or otherwise. If the city is to move forward with the project, it must be with the understanding that it will be privately funded. Bristol is a blue-collar town, and as such does not need or want such a project if they have to be responsible for the startup construction costs with a high-risk potential. The city is barely financially solvent, recent tax increase, let alone able to afford to speculate on such a high-risk investment gamble for the startup kick-off phases of private projects. Referendum. Depot Square currently has an estimated projected total project cost of $280 million. The project is the largest single project ever planned for the city of Bristol that I am aware of. It will affect many generations and many decades of residents living in and around the planned development. On July 17, 2014, an article appeared in the Bristol Press entitled "Dems Council Oppose Depot Referendum," precipitated by Democratic Council members Zappo, Brown, and Fortier, charging the GOP call for a non-binding referendum as another Republican move to avoid making a decision. In addition, to make it possible to kick off the beginning phases, privately owned projects, the Dems contingent is advocating additional city funding of at least $6 million and potentially much more. This is the largest single project that ever hit the city of Bristol, and still the Dems do not want the residents of the city to be able to vote on the project moving forward. Before the cards were on the table about the full scope of Depot Square, the city purchased and demolished the mall building without a referendum decision process for the potential $280 million project. Ellen Zappo was a member of the city council at the time. It is obvious that the council Dems consistently preferred to avoid involving city residents in the critical decision-making process, even though it is their money, a huge infringement on democracy. Apparently, council Dems would prefer democracy to start and stop at the city council, with utter disregard for the voted-on needs and wants of city residents. When enormous costs are involved, it is not just the duty of the elected councilors to make decisions for city residents, but rather to collect the related data, costs, and facts of the project, including their recommendations, and present them to their constituents for a vote under a referendum. The councilors work for the residents of the city, not vice versa, and consequently the residents deserve an opportunity to vote on any high-profile issues via referendum. Although a minor number of residents have contributed to the discussion on the future of downtown for years from time to time, the concepts and respective costs have been changed immensely, plus costs and financing not updated on a regular basis. Now that the cost estimates exist, however, funding is in doubt, it is easy to see the necessity and importance for having a referendum for the city residents to actually establish a project majority vote for the record, as the project will be affecting their environment for many future generations and decades. Sincerely, Ronald W. Guiness.
Thank you. James Ritchie.